we can actually set the conditions for us all to thrive. So really, the ultimate notion of this vision of an ecological civilization, what does an alternative look like, is a simple concept of setting the conditions for all beings to thrive on a regenerated earth. If you say that idea to the vast bulk of people in the world, what would you think about a world system that was based on that? They'd say, well, of course, that's what it should be. And then when you realize the gulf between what our current system does and that is the opportunity that exists. These are ideas that are already in practice. For the most part, people have thought them through. And this is the great opportunity. It's already happening. And when we can begin to weave those strands together, and they begin to form a different fabric.
Jeremy Lent, welcome back to the Accidental Gods podcast. How are you and where are you on this fine October afternoon?
Well, I'm just so delighted to be looking at your face, Mandra, and talking with you again. It's been a while. And yeah, how I am, and here I am in Berkeley, California, so it's morning my time. And well, I'm the way I usually am at the beginning of each week nowadays is I've got equal measures of feeling of absolute horror and despair at what's going on in the world around, and feeling of yes, this is so alive, and life feels so incredibly filled with so much energy right now and possibility. So I'm always holding those kind of
Yeah.
roughly imbalanced, with hopefully a little bit more on the hope and possibility side, but it's they're always both present, ever
Yeah.
present.
And we're recording this on the Monday after the most recent No Kings demonstrations in the US. And I was so impressed by the creativity and the courage and the resilience and the peacefulness. I saw somebody posted that one guy in their town was standing on a corner with a sign saying, I support Trump. And everybody just waved and said hi and walked past. And he was completely safe. And it was, we are here so that everybody has a right to say what they think. And I struggle to imagine, much as I don't like othering people, somebody with a sign saying I support whatever, I don't know, progressive stuff, or I am woke or something, surrounded by 100,000 MAGA supporters might not have been quite so safe. So it felt
Mhm.
like a really amazing testament to
Mhm.
the resistance that's happening in the US. It's glorious to watch.
Yes. And
So
I was delighted to have the opportunity to join
did
thousands of
you?
people there in Berkeley on the
Yes.
streets with my partner and with some friends who were visiting, and with
Okay.
a little 2-year-old baby who was already joining his second
Wow.
demonstration in his life
Okay.
there for freedom and democracy and for the human dignity for all.
Yeah.
My
What a
my
thing to
sign
be able to
simply says,
say.
respect human dignity
Right.
is
Well done, that man. And did it feel as uplifting and coherent as I imagine it did, that you're there with friends and there's so many of you that it gives you that sense of solidarity. Was that the case?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's why these demonstrations are so important because, people will critique and say, yes, but that's not a movement and you need to, and of course, all that's true. It's one day.
Yeah.
But it's the deep level, people seeing everyone around them and getting the courage
Yeah.
to actually stand up and know that there's things we can do about it. Absolutely crucial. Yeah.
Yes. And when Trump and the others are going, oh, a mere few thousand turned out and people are watching,
Yes.
literally hundreds of thousands walking down the street, it has to undermine their credibility. And somebody posted again on, I think, Substack, pointing out that for everybody marching, there are at least 10 who would like to have, but for
Mm,
reasons couldn't, maybe more. And if it
absolutely.
was 8.1 million, and if that 10 figure is right, then you've got 81 million really wanting something different. And that's beginning to head towards tipping points that even you and I could believe in. Because having read
Yes.
your book, we're going to talk about in a second, 3.5% is fine if what you're doing is changing the franchise of the existing system. You need
Yeah.
a lot more if what you want is total systemic change. But, it's heading towards those numbers, which is
Yeah.
inspiring. Anyway, let's get to that because you have written the most spectacular book, but it's not out until May. So today, for people who are new to the podcast, of which there are many, and don't know your background, let's introduce you and let them know how Jeremy Lent came to write The Patterning Instinct, the Web of Meaning, to found the Deep Transformation Network, and then came to write a book about Eco Civilization. Tell us your potted history, please.
Oh, sure. Thank you, Mandy. Yeah. Well, I guess in a more sort of potted way, uh, I guess what's relevant is I spent the first half of my life really as part, like embedded in the system. Even though I grew up actually rebelling against the system, and I left England in 1981 because I couldn't stand being in Margaret Thatcher's England, and I thought I was coming at age 21 to join the hippies at Woodstock in America. Little did I realize that Ronald Reagan had taken over. But that's a whole other story. But I ended up actually sort of going into what you think of the belly of the beast in a way. I did an MBA and I raised a family and I went into management consulting, started an internet company during the dot-com craze, took it public. It was at first it was a great success. Then it all crashed because I had to leave the company to look after my wife, who's very sick at the time, who passed away a number of years back. And then everything crashed around me. So the company crashed, my relationship with this person I'd loved, the only sort of love of my life, had crashed also because unfortunately she went through years of sort of borderline dementia. So it's like everything was like, what the hell is life about? And I sort of made the deep decision. I wasn't going to just give up and feel the sense of despair and get all cynical. I was going to make sure that whatever I did for the rest of my life was truly meaningful. And I realized I had no idea where meaning came from at that point. That I didn't want to take somebody else's word for it, which I felt I had done that first half of my life. So I just went into this deep, deep years and years of my own investigation for meaning. And it was cognitive, like I read everything I could about history and about science and these concepts like God or what makes humans unique or anything else. Where do they come from? What is the underlying thought processes behind them? So it's like peeling the onion. I went from history books or like popular science books. Like one of the first ones I read was Richard Dawkins' Selfish Gene. And I was going,
Whoa, which you critique quite
yeah.
interestingly in your book,
But
but you
honestly,
read
at
it.
first, the first time I came across it, was like, oh, well, maybe if this is true, I'm going to accept it because whatever I did, I wanted to make sure my rational brain could buy into it as much as my heart and soul. It wasn't a matter of I didn't want any bypassing. So look, if this is reality, so be it. And then I came across Fritjof Capra's work and all about systems thinking. It's going, oh, this is like this Richard Dawkins thing is bunk. So all these were discoveries I made all the way back to evolutionary biology and how humans evolved. And from that, I ended up writing a book that was kind of the book that I had been looking for when I started this investigation, which is like mapping out where do all these ideas come from? So that was a book called The Patterning Instinct, a cultural history of humanity's search for meaning. And really, it just kind of traced how these different ways in which humans have made meaning all the way from early hunter-gatherer times to the present day, and how that's affected history from those times to the rise of agrarian civilizations and hierarchy and possessions and patriarchy, how the splits between East Asian thinking and dualist thinking in the West with Christianity and how that led to modernity. And it kind of, that book took us all the way to the present and going like, and it was only through that that I began to start realizing we live in a modern world that is absolutely screwed up. It's a modern world based on a worldview that makes no sense and that's destructive, and we don't, it doesn't have to be this way. And the follow-on book I wrote was really the results of the similar investigation I'd been doing. It's more embodied around discovering things like meditation and Taoist practices and other more embodied forms. Qigong, absolutely. That's really become a central part of my life. And along with that was this realization there's a different way of making meaning that's possible, one that's scientifically rigorous, but is also deeply connected with these best spiritual traditions, Buddhism, Taoism, indigenous wisdom, and Neo-Confucianism, which very few people know much about, but was a light bulb when I discovered it. And that book is called The Web of Meaning, Integrating Science and Traditional Wisdom to Find Our Place in the Universe. And that was a book that basically looked at the big questions we ask. Who am I? Where am I? Why am I? How do I live? And in each case shows how the dominant worldview gives us answers that are not just dangerous and driving us to destruction, but plain wrong, incoherent scientifically. Um, so anyway, so that was the another book that I wrote, but that led me to this present moment, and then I'll kind of pause. But to that book ends up with this vision that I discovered from others around the time that I was doing this of what the world could look like if we actually s- lived in it based on a worldview of deep interconnectedness, which is what this book, The Web of Meaning, offers us as possibility. And this realization that there was a possibility of actually a different kind of future, different kind of civilization available to us. And now that's what I spent the last few years of my life diving into.
Right. And Eco Civilization is an astonishing book. And the level of research, the pages of references, and the sharpness of it, you must spend your entire life reading really quite detailed. You go down a lot of rabbit holes, but you come back with the essence of what's there. And then you frame it all in something that is, for me, genuinely Thrutopian. This is one of the most coherent theories of change I've come across. I spend my life looking for other people's theories of change. So thank you. But before we get into the structure of this and what the theory of change is, you started the Deep Transformation Network around the time that the Web of Meaning came out, I think. Can you tell us a
Right.
little bit about that and what it is and where it goes?
Yeah, sure. So um, basically, after I completed that book, The Web of Meaning, I started to, I created a course with Gaia Education, and I'm sure a lot of people know. Wonderful institution dedicated to offering these different ways of thinking around the world. And it's a 10-week course with basically like 20 of these like pre-recorded video uh, sessions, if you will, going through all the themes of these two books. And the course was called Principles and Practices of Deep Transformation. And what would happen at the end of each course, people would want to stay connected. And there was going, we've just built this community with all these ideas. How can we keep it happening? So I created, with the help of a few people who were sort of core to these ideas around that, this online community called the Deep Transformation Network, which is free for anyone to join. And we now have about 5,000 people have joined it over the years. And we have these live monthly meetings where we basically, usually I'm bringing on some really leading change maker who talks about, or a group talking about what they're doing. And we all get together as a global community to breakout
Yeah.
rooms, really build community. And we have these active feeds with lots of discussions taking place. So there's real deep transformation happening in this community. And it's a real special feeling of actually living the talk sort of thing with community.
Yeah, and it came out around the time that Jem Bandel was setting up or triggering the deep adaptation concept. And I love Jem Bandel's lovely, and I think some of his ideas on collapse are perfectly right. And I loved in your book someone suggesting that collapsology, probably don't say it quite like that, should be,
Yeah.
but the study of collapse should be a scientific pursuit.
Hmm.
But it's
Hmm.
also very hard, I think. The cognitive neuroscience of telling everybody we're all doomed and
Hmm.
not giving anyone anything other than basically your options are learn to farm and die with grace is
Hmm.
not going to help anyone. Whereas what you've got is transformation of this is the moment. This is the bottleneck. And with all the epistemic humility we can muster, we don't know where we're going.
Hmm.
There are an infinite number of possibilities, but we can shape a future that might actually flourish. And wouldn't it be a useful idea to give that some time? And that feels to me when I've been in it, that's exactly what everyone in the Deep Transformation Network is working towards is let's open the doors to possibility and see where we get to. So thank you. I will put a link to that in the show notes and people can come and find you there.
Yeah, that's great, man. I love how you're describing that, and that is pretty much very consistent with my own way of thinking about Jen Bendel's work, and a similar way of relating to it. And like you, I'm sure. Yeah, I have I feel like a generative, warm relationship with Jem. I respect his deep caring and his deep insights. Um, and really, I agree with the vast bulk of what he says, with the exception of the inevitability
Yeah.
versus that openness to what is actually possible. And that's where basically, to me, what it all comes down to is having immersed myself in systems thinking and recognition of nonlinearity of complex systems, realize that I think you called it epistemic humility. We cannot ever really know what is going to happen in all these multiple intersecting parts that
Yeah.
we even from 1 week from now we can predict, never mind years into the
Exactly.
future. And this is where what matters is not even, I mean, honestly, if you ask me, am I an optimist or pessimist? I'm much closer to Jen Bedell. There's this part of me on my left shoulder goes, you got to be kidding. This is
Yeah.
fucking hopeless. But there's another part of me like, you don't know. And when enough people actually begin to get that vision of what's possible, any kind of future is available to us. So that's where it becomes almost this moral imperative. This is
Yes.
our choice. The future is
Yes.
not a spectator sport. It's not something happening now that we're in the stands going, yeah, we're on the side of the good guys. It's like something we're actually playing in ourselves, every single conversation we have, every choice we make. And that's to me is the key.
Yes. I did a conversation, I had a conversation recently with Victoria Hirth, who has written a book called Beyond Profit. And at the end of it, she had a quote from Chief Arvol Looking Horse of the Lakota, which says, each of us was put on this earth at this time to personally determine the fate of humankind. Do you think you were put here for something less? And I'm in awe of Victoria that she put that at the end of her book, frankly, because I would have had that at the opening page. But it's the moral imperative of it might be that we're all doomed, but there's a window, and if we sit back and twiddle our thumbs, then we are all doomed. But we might not be. So it feels to me exactly that we go for it. So one of the things that Donella Meadows said, of the many amazing and wonderful things she said, was that the way to change a system is to continually, explicitly, and clearly critique the old system and build the visions of the new system. And that takes it a step further from Bucky Fuller, who said that you build the new system that makes the old system obsolete. And what you've done in your book, Eco Civilization, it seems to me, is savagely and very accurately, and in ways that made my blood run cold. Honestly, this is the world I swim in, and I thought I knew the iniquities of imperialism and colonialism, and I still believe we're in the dying days of the Roman Empire. And Nero was doing a lot of this stuff 2,000 years ago. But some of the things that you got here of the cold-blooded nature of the decisions that are made, that are quite deliberately condemning millions to misery and death, is horrible. So, shall we go to the top and you can unpick for us the impact that Tina has had on the world? Because I loved that, and that was one of the reasons that you left the UK. And then did an MBA. But let's go from that and let's have a look at what's not working, so that then we can look at our theory of change for what might work.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah. Big topics, Amanda. I so appreciate it. And so, yeah, so actually, this book begins with this person, Tina, and like about how Tina's had more impact on the world than almost anybody in the modern history. And you go, who the hell's Tina? So Tina, and so some people are probably in the know as they're hearing this, is an acronym of "There is no alternative," which is this famous phrase that Margaret Thatcher put out right as she was wresting control. She and Ronald Reagan, like bringing neoliberalism into our world. And this idea of there is no alternative is that has become the sort of water we all swim in. That's the thing that almost all of us take for granted without even realizing it anymore after decades of this takeover of neoliberalism, which is the sense that there's no, it used to be in the 20th century, there was capitalism on one side and socialism or communism on the other, and there was a battle between them, and it seems somewhat balanced. And then There was the Cold War arose, and then Soviet Union collapsed, and China transformed. And so it's like there was this famous book by Francis Fukuyama called The End of History, saying it's all over now. Capital, like the free market wins, and now it's like just a matter of how much better we make things or whatever. And of course, that is not the case whatsoever. But the sense that whenever even people who care passionately about the world spend years of their lives devoting their lives to trying to make things a better place for the earth, for humanity, they're almost always nowadays doing it within capitalism. And they're trying to look at, well, we've got to use, how can we take these big, yeah, finance is so powerful. How can we sort of try to incent the big banks and the big billionaires to actually invest in good things and make and fix this? And maybe technology can be used carefully to fix this and fix that. And really, this is the what the book is about. And in simple terms, it's this notion that actually, or for all those people who are trying to fix the system, the news is, hey, the system isn't broken. The system is actually doing exactly what it was intended to do. And the first part of the book looks at how the system was developed over centuries, many centuries, to actually be a wealth pump, to suck the wealth of human activity and human lifeblood and human spirit and the wonderful abundance of all the earth, to suck all of that into this pump going up to the elites, a very, very small number of elites who then get to do what they want with it and essentially most of all reinforce that wealth pump so it keeps going for generation after generation. And that's really is the sort of kind of top story of the first part of the book that looks at why it's not just a simple statement, why it is true that this system is doing what it was intended to do.
Yes. And even then, there's places I want to take this. I think there's a couple of statistics that I think are worth nailing, again, because they were new to me. And one of them was, can't remember, you will probably remember the researcher who did this. It may have been Jason Hickel, that for every dollar earned by somebody in the bottom 90% of the world, one of the billionaires earns or makes or accrues $1.7 million.
Yeah.
And that, I
It's
mean, once you hear that, it's like, why are there not pitchforks in the streets? That
yeah.
absolutely, I mean, and then the book explains why there are not pitchforks in the streets. It's
Mhm.
wholly unacceptable. One of the things I listened to Gary Stevenson, who's an interesting working class former trader in the UK, and he set up Gary's Economics podcast, which is well worth a listen. And he did an episode with Zach Polanski recently, and he pointed out something that I hadn't really got my head around before, which was if one were to have $1 billion and it was just accruing at an average rate of 5%, that's 1 million a week for doing
Mhm.
nothing. You're just
Mhm.
sitting there and your bank account goes up by 1 million a week.
Right.
And
Exactly.
and so of course he says we leave that for the next 10 to 15 years, they will own everything. It will all have flowed to the top. And exactly as you said, this is what the system is for. But the
Yeah.
system is not fit for purpose if that purpose is the continuation of complex life on Earth. And
Exactly.
as you pointed out way down at the foot of your book, again, I can't remember who it was, Carl, maybe, that this is our one chance for ever in the
Oh,
evolutionary history of this
yes.
planet
Hmm.
to develop a technologically literate civilization, because if we go down and the sixth mass extinction wipes us out, and there've been five before, there's no reason why we are supposedly so special. The next evolution of intelligence will not have access to easy fossil fuels or easy minerals or anything that we've had,
Yes,
which feels big.
exactly. Exactly. That's an astronomer called Fred Hoyle, who
Oh,
is
it's
the one
Fred
who
Hoyle. Yes, of
pointed
course
this
it
out
is. Yes.
some years back. So yeah, so and that's the thing, the stakes could not be higher. We're not even talking about, oh, this is another phase and we're going into no, we're talking about the potential for a civilizational collapse, so like that puts all the civilizational collapses of the past into like a little micro speck of history compared to what we'd be looking at. And the amount of suffering along with that, the amount of human suffering. Uh, this is what sometimes it gets me. I guess my sort of hackles go up a bit when I hear in conversations people say, "Oh yeah, yeah, we just need collapse. Let's just let it happen, start all over again." And it's such a casual way, which I'm not, oftentimes it's just people just haven't thought it through. But the thing is that the vast bulk of people are so far from the sources of simple food and sustenance that it would instantly lead to massive breakdown of society, absolute devastation, death, fear, disaster, violence. And that's something that we all need to try to do everything we can to protect against. And I think that the thing is, again, is not trying to keep the system the way it is, but to sort of build the new possible system in the detritus or in the compost of the old, so that as it unravels, there's something possible to put in its place.
Yes, thank you. Yes, there are so many ways we could take this. Let's let's dig a little bit more deeply into the history of
Mm.
how we got here
Yeah.
and the fact that the system is designed to do this because I think not everybody is aware. Partly, I think I know this stuff, and I wasn't aware of how very deliberately over the last half millennium, at
Mhm.
least. I mean, I think the Romans were doing it. I think it was, and the Romans didn't learn it. But you've got a quote here from Patrick Cahoon, who said, "Poverty is therefore a most necessary and indispensable ingredient in society, without which nations and communities could not exist in a state of civilization. It is the source of wealth, since without poverty there could be no labor, there could be no riches, no refinement, no comfort, and no benefit to those who may be possessed of wealth." And this guy was not strung up from the nearest lamppost at the point when he published this. And to be fair, it was back in 1771 or thereabouts. But
Mm.
this is,
Mhm.
they're absolutely, they're not hiding this. This is, we
Mm.
the rich exist to exploit the poor, and we had better do it by whatever means necessary. Further down the book, you look at the kind of soft power and the hard power. The soft power is the narratives that keep people
Mhm.
self-controlling. I noticed that Timothy Snyder said from the moment Trump was elected, do not capitulate in advance. And
Yes.
that feels like something that we could have been telling ourselves for the last several centuries. So take that wherever you want to go. The hard-nosedness.
Yeah.
If you can remember the Rhodes quote, that also blew my mind, but I can't find it at the moment.
Yes, I can quote that for you. I just kind of pulling it up here on my own computer. So Cecil Rhodes, probably most people still know that name. He was basically one of the wealthiest, most powerful people in the world in the late 19th century, like the ultra mega sort of colonialist, a little bit like we maybe the billionaires now that we all know their names so well. He owned the De Beers diamond mine. He was prime minister of the Cape Colony in South Africa, and in fact, they even named a country after him, Rhodesia, which then became Zimbabwe. So, so it's what's amazing. So he was there in London, this incredible, super uber wealthy guy, and he went to this meeting of unemployed workers in the East End of London, and he got terrified because they were saying bread, bread, we need a revolution. And he's going, oh my God, like what happens if all these workers get together? So he went back and wrote in his notes about but we could have a bloody civil war. And then he got this idea. He said, I've become more convinced of the importance of imperialism than ever before. He called it his cherished idea. He said, what we've got to do is we colonial statesmen, we've got to acquire new lands, settle those surplus populations, provide new markets for the goods and produced in our factories and mines. And then we avoid civil war by becoming imperialists and basically give just enough wealth, like suck wealth from elsewhere in the world where they're too weak to even stop us doing that. And just give just enough wealth to the workers here in England and places so they won't have a revolution and then keep the rest to ourselves. We can keep this going forever. And this was his great cherished idea. And well, he did a great job of it, basically, because here we are, 130 years later, whatever, and the billionaires are doing exactly the same thing as we speak right now. And there's this, and so this is called. there's this great phrase for it, which is called structural violence. Because what is so crucial to understand is these are not like abstract ideas. And it's not like, oh, well, these billionaires, they get their wealth. Well, that's okay. We'll just work and get stuff done. There is actually violence that is being done when that billionaire is on their super yacht, just like you say, with their money just earning more in an hour or a day than most people work in a whole lifetime. It's not a victimless crime. It's actually a crime against humanity and against the earth because that is happening at the expense. It's through a system of exploitation and extraction, which is pulling those resources, destroying people's lives, stopping them having access to healthcare, basic services, everything like that. So those few people can just enjoy their wealth. That is what's known as structural violence. And even though the structural violence is less direct than if you see somebody take a gun and shoot somebody right in front of you, that's direct violence. But structural violence ends up killing, maiming, destroying the lives of way, way more people every day than the kind of direct violence that is more obvious to us. So that's just a really key concept to understand. And I guess just to take one more point in terms of the themes there you've raising, is this notion of why aren't there pitchforks in the street? Why don't we all say this is screwed up? Like because if enough of us did that, this wouldn't be happening. I mean, and I'll give you an example of that. Just a few years ago, in India, there was this idea of like revamping some of the rules around agriculture in order to make it more open to neoliberal takeover, basically. And this was one thing where the Indian farm workers said, no, we're not going to accept this. And all of a sudden, hundreds of thousands, I think there are millions of farm workers in the streets in Calcutta and Delhi, just basically blocking access to the entire city with their tractors and their carts and everything else. And the government just had to give in. So, oh, this isn't working. We'll do just what they said. So when there's enough people getting together and saying we're not going to let this happen, that's the where change can happen. Why doesn't it happen? Because of what's known as cultural hegemony. And this is this key concept that was first developed by Antonin Gramsci, who was a Italian Marxist thinker in the 1930s who got jailed by Mussolini, ended up dying in jail. But he managed to write these really deep philosophical reflections even while he was there in jail. And what he recognized is that the way in which the system maintains that wealth pump is not the elites themselves couldn't do it on their own, but they've got a whole slew of lieutenants, basically, the colonels of their hegemony, who actually condition and brainwash the rest of society into believing that this is all for their benefit, or at the minimum, that very concept of Tina, there is no alternative. But most people even think, well, it's okay anyway. This whole notion of the sort of breadcrumbs that, the sort of drip that the wealthy people, the wealthier they get, they'll drip a little bit of wealth to all of us. So continual growth is good for us. So basically the economists, the lawyers, the most thinkers, like people who actually write these columns in the New York Times or most media in the world. These are all people like Steven Pinker or whatever, is a great example. Brilliant intellectuals who use the power of this intellect to come up with arguments that make ultimately their masters, these wealthy billionaires and academies that are funded by the billionaires, that make them happy because it gets people to believe a whole mythos underlying the very system that is destroying them.
Yeah, I remember a very famous interview between Noam Chomsky and I think Andrew Rawnsley decades ago, where Rawnsley's going, but nobody tells me what to think. I write what I believe. And Noam Chomsky's going, yes, and that's why you have your job. Because if you didn't believe what they wanted you to believe, they wouldn't employ you. And you are as complicit as everybody else. And Rawnsley was not happy, but I think it was Rawnsley. If I'm wrong, guys, let me know. You've got a bit, I want to move on from this, but there was something that this actually blew my mind was George Kennan wrote a memorandum to colleagues. So he was a US diplomat Cold War strategist, and he wrote, we have about 50% of the world's wealth. So that's the US. We, the US, have 50% of the world's wealth, but only 6.3% of its population. In this situation, we cannot fail to be the object of envy and resentment. Our real task in the coming period is to devise a pattern of relations which will permit us to maintain this position of disparity. To do so, we will have to dispense with all sentimentality and daydreaming, which is to say humanity and ethics and morals, and our attention will have to be concentrated everywhere on our immediate national objectives. And then you go on to say the IMF and the World Bank were set up, and then we end up with the ISDS and all of the systems that maintain that disparity that he was talking about, and the barefaced cold-bloodedness of it. I know that these people are fundamentally broken, but I forget. I think, they're just decent people who've just been subverted by the system. And then you read that and you go, no, actually, that's actually not true. And I think somewhere in the book you said that America has, one way or another, overturned the democratic governance of 71 other nations in an effort to make sure that they could continue to pump the wealth to the top of the US out of pretty much everywhere else in the world.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. I mean, and these are statistics and things that I uncovered in my own research. They were just as much a surprise to me over the last few years of researching this book as they've been to you as you were reading it. And yeah, and I should just add, in every case when I've come across one of these statistics, I wanted to make sure that this is really credible. I mean, there's too many books written where you get quotes that turn out to be apocryphal, or then or like some statistic that, wow, this is amazing. Turns out, well, it's not actually true. Like, I mean, there's examples, even statistics that I would have loved to rely on. Like, there's people who say indigenous people account for 80% of the world's biodiversity or whatever. Like, great, wow, and then you look at it and you say, and people have critiqued it, say, well, there's no such thing as 80% of biodiversity. How do you even measure it? And where did this number come from? And you realize people have quoted it from quotes, other people have quoted it, and it's a whole self-referential thing, and there's no basis. And, it doesn't take away from the incredible importance of indigenous people protecting diversity, but let's believe these quotes that we're relying on. And so every one of these things that you said, every one of those quotes, every one of these statistics, I've double, triple checked. And, obviously I can't guarantee 100% every one of them. I've done my very best, but I think this is solid stuff, is my point. This is what the world is actually been based on. And this is, one of those chapters that you're talking about is called The History They Didn't Teach You at School. And I think this is the thing to understand is that we are conditioned. We're conditioned by people who themselves have been conditioned. I mean, and for every one of these George Kennans or Rhodes of the world who were absolute hardcore, cynical, maybe even psychopaths or sociopaths, or certainly in Rhodes' case, I don't think that's the case. I think he thought of himself as a very humane person. And things like the Rhodes Scholarship, which exists now, they're really helping underprivileged people. He set in place. But he was so much into that worldview, it didn't even occur to him there were these alternative ways of looking at things. So it's important to realize this, and important to realize that the vast bulk of people working in corporations, actually doing in their work they're doing the harm that is caused so much in the world. The vast bulk of lawyers fighting on behalf of these illegal corporations or whatever. Um, they're not bad people. In most cases, it's people who actually they care about their families. Maybe they've looked at things. This is really screwed up, but I've got to make my mortgage payment, and I don't feel good about what I'm doing, but I'm doing it anyway. And there's people who do feel good about what they're doing because they've been told by the corporation they're working for that the marketing they're doing is really helping people because it's getting people to have whiter teeth or to have more access to whatever it is that the sales thing is about. And the point is that it's hard for people to actually face that and say, oh my God, this is yeah, all the years I've been working, I've actually been helping this kind of Wendigo monster, as we call it, like this monster of extraction, rather than, um, and so I just want to layer all this critique, with a deep sense of kind of a sense of like self-compassion for each of us around this. I mean, I was involved the first half of my life in building, actually starting a corporation that was part of this system of extraction exploitation. Did a great job of getting people to take out more debt and get credit cards online and all that stuff. And it took me years myself to realize, that I was part of something that was super destructive. And then, wow, what can I do about that? So I just sort of want to put that out there as a invitation to people who might find themselves involved in that system to look at their place in that system and not do it with a sense of, oh my God, I'm being judged for being so bad. But it's that openness to explore and inquire is the beginning of that sort of basically beginning to push back against that cultural hegemony.
Brilliant. Right. Yes. Okay, so I'd like to rest on that for a moment because I think this is really important. We all exist. If we're listening to this podcast, we can speak English, we've got a computer and or a phone, and we can listen to podcasts. We are integral to this system.
Yeah.
And we didn't expect to be. We didn't grow up desiring to be part of a system that is creating omnicide. Now, I love the phrase omnicide. I mean, I don't love the fact it's happening, but I think it's a clever phrase. Let's look into that. And so I think getting lost in shame and blame and guilt or deflecting it outwards, like you said, there are a lot of people who think a breakdown is a good thing, or who want to wipe humanity off the face of the earth, or want to decide to blame, the population is too great. They tend to be quite old and they've got 4 or 5 kids, but it's not their problem that the population is too great. It's people in the global majority who are having more children, and then we can blame them, and then it's somebody else's problem.
Hmm.
And somehow it seems to me doing the inner work of, yes, I have been complicit, and I did not have too many other options, but now I've seen it.
Hmm.
What can I do then? How
Yeah.
can I be part of the shift to a new system? Feels to me this is what your book is offering people, is windows into a different world.
Hmm.
So I want to get to your theory of change in a moment, but just before we get there, your Wendigo or Wetico, you've got Wendigo's law, and you've got what I would call the trauma culture you are defining as the Wendigo culture or the Wendigo culture. Tell us a little bit about that because it feels like a useful metaphor and very similar to the hungry ghost concept that's often in
Right.
Tibetan lore. So tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about that, and
Yeah.
then let's go into omnicide, and then let's start looking at the theories of change.
Yeah. Yeah. So this this concept of Wendigo, often referred to as Wetico, same thing, um, is basically this is a sort of monster in the mythology of the Ojibwe people of the Great Lakes region. And when the Europeans first arrived in North America, 500 years ago, the indigenous people there, they couldn't believe what they saw. They realized that no matter what you gave to those white people, they wanted more and they wanted more, and they conquered something, then they had to conquer further. There was nothing that would ever satisfy them. And this was, they related this to this terrifying monster that used to terrify the little children around campfires, the Wendigo monster, who was a ravenous, like this 10-foot giant with a heart made of ice. And it greedily sought all humans to devour, like little kids, if they strayed too far from their families, whatever. But here's the thing, if you got bitten by a Wendigo monster, you didn't just get consumed by them, but you became a Wendigo yourself, and you're doomed forever to roam with this insatiable hunger. Because the terrible thing about for a Wendigo monster is the more they ate, the hungrier they were. So they could never ever get that ravenous hunger satisfied. So the indigenous people looked at these Europeans as they're Wendigo. They got bitten by the Wendigo monster. And basically, that is a great definition of what capitalism is. That when you take a deep economic analysis of capitalism, it's this process by which capital has to always earn more returns. And the more you return, And the more you get, the more you have to keep earning those returns because otherwise you lose out compared to the other sources of capital that are making more returns. And that's why my the sort of little swerve I did in this book was take this idea of Wendigo, which is so core to this kind of cultural pathology that has become spread all around the world, but call it Wendigo Incorporated, because really the corporate system is essentially the legal economic manifestation of that Wendigo virus, if you will, that has now taken over the world. And it's by recognizing that once again, we begin to empower ourselves to do something about it once we see what is actually happening.
Yes, yes. Nate Higgins calls it the superorganism, and I tend to
Yes.
call it the death cult of predatory capitalism. But it's
Yeah.
that thing that is so voracious. And you said in the books that we're often afraid of AI, growing sentience and taking over and destroying the whole world, the infinitely replicating paperclip model or whatever. And yet we've already got a system that is
Yeah.
taking over the world because it has to grow and it is insatiable. And and yet the narrative, as we've said, is this is the way the world is. There is no alternative. This is human nature. I think you unpick that quite neatly, that we tend to look at our own nature or the nature of the system or the nature of the people around us and assume that this is the way humanity is and always has been. And and quite clearly there are other cultures, exactly as you said, when the Ojibwe met the white people, they couldn't understand why they kept having to have stuff. You had something, I think it was the Cree of the Western people wanted more furs, so they put the prices up. So the Cree bought them fewer furs because they didn't need any more money. And that totally did not compute in the Western mindset of we offer you more money, why are you not bringing us more furs? Well, we don't need them. Um, and so somehow understanding that because we think that everybody is a rational actor and everybody is selfish and everybody is out to destroy everything in their own service doesn't mean that's the way it has to be or the way it's always been or the way that it could be because people also, given the chance, thrive most when they're feeling generous and when they're expressing their biggest meaning. And you talk about the two forms of happiness. Can we talk
Mm.
about that for a short bit and then we'll go more into your theories of change?
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. And this is crucial what you're saying. Because it's another sort of almost like a false turn that caring people can make looking at all this stuff is to look at everything we've just been talking about and say, yeah, human nature sucks. This is terrible. And like it's kind of hopeless because look at what's happened historically. And the good news that we discover from that I described in those earlier books, like The Web of Meaning and others, is that that's actually not the case. Human nature, um, I mean, there's a reason why we want human nature to be filled with goodness and solidarity and caring, and those are values that mean something to us because that's our evolved values. That's how we as humans evolved. And exactly like indigenous groupings, for nomadic hunter-gatherers, which is how we spent 95 or 99% of the human race, depending on how you define it, that's that those groups actually lived according to solidarity, a sense of group identity, utterly different. So that when somebody acted like that Wendigo kind of virus in those groups, they were considered pathological, like dangerous. And you'd try to work with them and show them their harm. And if they kept acting like that, you'd ostracize them. You'd like get them out of your group because they didn't belong there. And uh, so that's something that really we need to understand. And so this is why the sense of happiness is a really important key thing that you were just asking about, because it actually is uh, the human place to actually achieve long-term happiness is through being who we were evolved to be and acting out in those ways, not acting according to try to fix ourselves to fit into this world that is so pathological right now. And it was all the way back to Aristotle, who actually defined this difference between different forms of happiness. And he had these two words for it. One was hedonia, and one was eudaimonia. And hedonia refers to the kind of sort of short-term happiness, if you will, there is a lot to
Dopamine
do.
hits.
Exactly, exactly. Sort of hedonic happiness, right? But it was something, it was more subtle than we think of hedonia as, just like, sex, drugs, and rock and roll or whatever. And but it was more subtle than that. To him, hedonia happiness was almost happiness that was temporary and passing and came from external. And so it might be even things like having financial security or having people respect you and saying good things about you. It's not like it's bad to enjoy elements of hedonic happiness. But his point was that's not what true happiness is about. True happiness he was eudaimonia. And what it literally means in Greek is like all like the good spirits. And what he means by that is this, what he saw as a process, almost like an evolutionary process, that every entity that exists in this world is driven to actually fulfill its own inherent destiny. Now, he didn't know about DNA and stuff like that, but evolutionary biology now can really help to explain that. So DNA evolved in every species to be a certain kind of fulfillment. With if you're a tree, an olive tree or a beech tree, or if you're a swallow, or if you're a human being, there is a evolutionary drive to really fulfill the very possibilities that exist within you. And so once we begin to recognize that, then we begin to see that in Aristotle's mind, eudaimonia for any entity, human or non-human, comes from when they are truly fulfilling their inherent nature. And our inherent nature is not to be like on this hedonic treadmill of consumerism. Our inherent nature is actually to be in community, is actually to feel love and be loved, is actually to feel a sense of being valued by our community and contributing to our community, and for our community to be in harmony with the rest of what indigenous people call all our relatives, all our relations, the rest of the natural world. That actually leads to a sense of deep fulfillment. But that is absolutely against the desires of Wendigo Inc. Because if everyone felt that, they wouldn't be having to go buy the next thing that came out, and they wouldn't have to go and spend their time working just to get up on the status level. So the whole process of Wendigo Inc. is essentially to stop people from actually orienting towards fulfilling their true nature from that eudaimonic impulse and to stay on that hedonic treadmill.
In spite of the moral hazard of that, and almost there was a phrase that I can't remember now that somebody had defined the moral lifeboat, was it? That it's okay for the rich people to behave in a way that is guaranteed to destroy millions of people because basically they deserve to be in the lifeboats and the other people don't. Let's not worry about that at the moment, because what I really want to get to, I think we're going to come back in about 6 months' time when this book is about to launch, and we're really going to look into the detail of how you think we could step forward of the systems and the interlocking polysystemic change that we need. But what I'd like to do with the remaining time just now is have a look at the theory of change of the overarching concept. So we've established that the existing system is not broken. It's doing exactly what it was meant to do, which is make the rich very, very, very rich at the expense of everybody else. And it happens that we're up against biophysical limits. We're recording this a week after the first paper suggested that we passed a tipping point in terms of coral bleaching. So we have got a very narrow window of time, which is good in a way, because it means that Steve Bannon and the others will not get their 10,000-year Reich, because you can't have that in the face of 3 degrees, 5 degrees, 10 degrees of warming. And we've established that we have a narrow window that we could get through if we can establish total systemic change. So as an overarching concept, in your framework of the world, what are the stories that could lead us forward towards the total systemic change that we need? Because given that we're going to have to change our monetary system, our governance system, our food and farming system, our educational system, all of the things that you look at in the book, all of those have to change in quite a short space of time. Talk to us about the narrative shift that we will have to embrace and extend and ripple out in fractal phases so that enough of us are heading for that? Does that make sense as a question?
It does. It does. Certainly. Well, I think maybe the fundamental essence of that narrative shift is the exact opposite of Tina. And it says there is no alternative. And really, the narrative shift is actually there is an alternative, which, of course, is so consistent with the very notion of Thrutopia, everything that you are devoting so much of your time to, which is what I love so much. Because the reality is, and there's a basis for that. This is not wishful thinking, is the point. And the basis is what I was just describing, that actually our human evolved nature is to be pro-social, is to be in solidarity with others, is to actually want to contribute to others, and all the things that we are then trained to be in this modern society is against our nature. And what that means basically is every single human being born into this world, all 8 billion of us so far, and everyone to be born in the future, um, and this system has to work to basically condition, like basically destroy the core elements of what has evolved human nature and human needs in that person and turn them into this sort of broken version of themselves in order to contribute to this system of Wendigoing, to this omnicide, this destruction of everything. And that's where part of the possibility exists. Because what it feels to me is simply needed. We don't need to get to some higher level of human consciousness. Sometimes people say, it's all screwed up. Yeah, we've got to evolve to a higher level. And in some ways, I believe that and I live according to that. Yes, there is a certain higher level of connection with source, of connection with love and what is greater than us that would be great for us all to get to. But before we even all get to that point, it's almost like what we really need to do is reconnect with what is already in us. And this is, I think, the practices available to us for ourselves and available to us in community. And by doing that, basically the story is we can actually set the conditions for us all to thrive. So really, the ultimate notion of this vision of an ecological civilization, what does an alternative look like, is a simple concept of setting the conditions for all beings to thrive on a regenerated earth. Now, I will warrant you that if you say that idea to the vast bulk of people in the world, in every nation, of every stripe in the world, and you say, well, what would you think about a world system that was based on that? They'd say, well, of course, that's what it should be. I mean, with very rare exceptions, this is such common sense. And then when you realize the gulf between what our current system does and that is the opportunity that exists. And the other sort of message, the other sort of story about this to understand is these are not utopian ideas. Like you make this distinction between utopia and Thrutopia. These are ideas that are already in practice. For the most part, people have thought them through, whether it's in economics or how you like greater wealth equality or governance or true democracy or how you redesign technology, anything like that. People have thought it through. They're actually doing it in small islands that we call islands of coherence in a sea of chaos. And this is the great opportunity. It's already happening. It's happening in the margins. It's not being talked about in the mainstream media because of that cultural hegemony that we talked about earlier. But it's there. And when we can begin to weave those strands together, and they begin to form a different fabric. So ultimately, as our current society unravels because of its internal contradictions, we can be taking those strands that are unraveling and reweaving them into a fabric that could actually work for all our future generations.
Yeah. Okay, so in the last few minutes, I would like to talk a little bit about what you're seeing around the world. I was listening to Nate Hagen's relatively recently, and he was talking to someone in the AI world, tech bro world, who said that 5 years ago, if he'd gone to a dinner party and told people that he meditated, they would all looked at him like he had horns. And now, if he went to the same dinner party and told people that he didn't meditate, they would look at him like he had horns. And so something is shifting, and we are all aware that simply sitting on a cushion observing your breath does not necessarily turn you into a decent human being, and there's a lot of other inner work to be done, but at least it's a step on the way. And it seems to me that there's an accelerating pace of change. Clearly, the old system is being dismantled in real time by the sociopaths who have stolen control, but it had to be dismantled. I was, as I'm sure you are, devastated when Trump alleged that he won in November. I'm pretty certain that Musk put a thumb on the scales, but there we go. And yet, if Kamala Harris had won, she could not have dismantled the system.
No.
And he is just simply taking it apart. You know, laws are what I make them to be, and I choose to ignore them. And you suddenly discover that international treaties don't actually exist unless everybody agrees that they do, which is great if we're talking about ASDS, what's it called, International States Dispute Settlement, which is a total utter fucking disaster at every level except for the people who own the companies that are going to get it. And if it's that easy to dismantle international law, then the world is a very different place. So the cracks are where the light gets in is a cliche, but I'm seeing very big cracks. And I wonder what sources of light you are seeing that might have arisen since you finished writing the book, which I realize is relatively recently. But you know, the world is changing very fast. What sources of hope are you seeing other than 8.1 million people marching on the streets of the US on a No King's Day, which was huge?
Yeah, which is huge, definitely. And yeah, I think really the source of hope to me comes in community. It comes in just connecting with others. And as you connect with others, even people who might have different views from you, you begin to realize that, like, sort of like I was saying earlier, that the deepest heart, what almost all people, with the exception of that very small minority who are true sociopaths and don't actually have access to these core evolved senses of empathic and compassionate experience. But the vast bulk of people, they want a decent life for themselves, for their loved ones, and for others around them. They don't get joy in seeing suffering. They don't get joy in seeing genocide taking place in Gaza and people being massacred, innocent little children. It hurts people and they want to do something about it. And this, I think, is the core that basically every new generation now that arises in this 21st century, in this society that unravels, is going to be asking more and more, what can we do? They're not going to take for granted that cultural hegemony, those preconceived ideas that they're told this is how society works, while they're watching society not working and they're looking for alternatives. And right now, the vast bulk of the alternatives being offered to them are being offered by authoritarian bull rackers who basically say, yeah, this is all screwed up, like trust us, like believe in us, because look what those technocrats and those intellectual elites have been telling you. Because those intellectual elites essentially, over the last couple of generations, have sold their soul to the neoliberal hegemony. It's why in most cases, the moderate left, whether it's the Democrats or the Labour Party in the UK or so many other parts of the world, they are intellectually and morally bankrupt for the most part because they've given themselves up to that Tina notion that there is no alternative. They're trying to just make the alternative just that little bit better for a few people on the side. This is where the great opportunity comes for all of us, is to just recognize actually we can do something different. And that is what gives our human heart that ability to come alive. And that is what living in community with others around us and sharing those ideas and getting energized from our connection with others is where the opportunity exists.
Beautiful. Thank you. You have a brilliant quote from Lynn Margulis who said, "Life did not take over the world by combat, but by networking."
Hmm.
And that really does feel like, exactly as you say, one of the best things that our generation could offer, I think, future generations, are social technologies that build communities of place, purpose, and passion that actually work. Because we haven't grown up in community in the way that Indigenous peoples have. We don't know how to make communities that actually function, but we can work it out. It can't be that hard because, as you said, it's part of our nature. So we can definitely do it. Okay, we're way over time again. I don't know where the time goes to. Jeremy, that was amazing. Thank you. I was so looking forward to part two when we will discuss in detail the
Hmm.
structures and the concepts and the Thrutopian steps that you can see that would take us to an eco civilization where humanity thrives as an integral part of a flourishing web of life, which has got to be our future. And wouldn't that be an exciting future to wake up in the morning and know that your life had meaning and that meaning was the welfare of everything else that lived? It's
Yes.
got to be worth trying for, eh?
What a future it's available
Yeah,
to us, man. Yeah,
yeah.
thank you so much.
Thank
Really
you.
interesting conversation. So enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And we'll talk soon. We'll
Great.
talk in April. Soon enough. Thank you.
Love it. Thank you.